Today in Nature of Science, we're going to talk about what is science and what is a scientific question. So what is science? Science is asking questions and making predictions and then experimenting and finding evidence to either support or disprove your prediction. So the first thing you have to start with is asking that question. With that question, you're going to make some predictions about what you expect to happen, and then you will experiment. So experimenting, you can use graphs and models and analyzing that data that you might correct. And with that data, then you are going to graph out your results, trying to explain what you have seen or describe that experiment. In science, with these experiments, we look at patterns and we try to find patterns with things. So there are four main types of science, and they're based on a body of knowledge, whether you're studying something in nature. So biology, chemistry, physics, and earth science. All four of these rely extremely heavily on evidence, and they use the scientific method to examine and question results and things that are being seen in nature. So we will be looking at biology in this class, but today we're just focusing on general sciences and what that looks like. So in science, the first part is asking a question. So what is a scientific question? Scientific questions are deductive in nature, meaning that they work to narrow the scope. You're going to focus in on a specific example or observation. They do use experimental design to help answer that question, and most questions can be answered in science. So an example of a scientific question is, do all wasps have stingers? That's something that you could physically go out and look and test to help answer that question. Scientific questions are used every day, and in fact, science is used every day in normal life. Just think about today when you woke up. How many technologies that you may have used? Electricity, plumbing, thank goodness, right? And cell phones, air conditioning, all common conveniences that we take for granted that science has developed and created. Medical treatments are a huge one too. It's developing every year and expanding. Understanding behavior. This is a new one that's growing both for human behavior, why we do what we do, or how we respond in certain situations, but also animals and plants. Surprisingly, animals respond in common patterns to certain situations, and plants, you can predict responses that they may have to certain situations. Domestic animals or plants, think of how many of you have ever had a house plant or animals around your house. These domesticated animals and plants were created through science, and it all started with questioning. How does something work? Why is something happening? Or when can we predict something to happen? And scientists would test it and then explore and travel further in depth into those questions, explore, find answers, and then create new technologies for us. So specifically in this class, we're going to look at biology. Biology is the study of life, and that is all life. So on that right-hand picture, there's a tree of life, or a picture, a version of the tree of life. That is all living things that we know of on this planet. And so you'll see a large group of bacteria up here. This is all bacteria that we have classified and we can find. Archaea in the bottom red, and that is a type of bacteria that can live in extreme environments. And then eukaryotes, which are on the right-hand side at the bottom, those are what most people think of when they think of life. So mammals, fish, reptiles. Eukaryotes are what we see normally on a day-to-day basis, but you'll notice that tree of life encompasses much more than just what we see and interact with physically. Bacteria makes up the majority of living things on this planet. So who are biologists and what do they do? So biologists, there is a biologist that studies every single organism on that tree of life. Okay, there's a diversity of life. Sometimes they focus on one species, sometimes they focus on a group of organisms or the environment that those organisms live in. A lot of people, or a lot of biologists, research diseases, not only for the impact of the disease on humans or other species, but how maybe we can prevent diseases or prevent the spread. In order to study life, no matter where or what you're studying, they have to develop technologies that allow you to study that organism. So think about a bacteria and how small that organism is. Being able to study those organisms means that you are able to see them physically. So microscopes and other technologies had to be developed before we could even understand about a bacteria's life. Also think about fish or coral reefs that you would have to be able to get to and study down there. That bottom left picture, there is a scientist or biologist who's studying coral reefs, and you'll see that he's got paper. That paper is actually a technology they had to develop. It is waterproof paper, and they are able to write and take notes and observations while they're underwater, come back up to the surface, and then record those digitally. All of our technologies to date have come from somebody working to study some sort of living organism or to make it easier to study life. So here's some examples of different biologists. This is a very short list of many different types of biologists. Most people think, zoologists work at zoos, but that's not actually accurate. Zoologists studies a variety of animals, and typically they pick a subsection of animals to study. Ichthyologists down there study fish, mammalogists study mammals, and so on and so forth. So there's a wide variety. Sometimes you can get into conservational biologists, which means they're working on a group of organisms trying to conserve or protect that area that they're living in or the organisms themselves. So that will wrap up our, one more thing. So scientific questions versus non-scientific questions. We said biologists or people that study science start with a question. This is the key concept for this video. And the biggest thing is that non-scientific questions cannot be answered by science. Okay, so no matter who the scientist is, what they're studying, they cannot answer a non-scientific question. So a non-scientific question is based on an opinion or a judgment. These cannot be tested, observed, and finding out facts for. Scientific questions, on the other hand, they're broad why questions or how. They're observable, testable. You can go out and physically find answers to. Opinions, you cannot, or judgments, you cannot, because when you ask one person, it may be different from another. There's no physical right or wrong, not opinion. So science cannot test these. So most science questions can be answered, scientific questions. So most questions can be answered by scientists somehow. These are the three key elements right here. They're testable, observable, or you can run some sort of simulation to help you answer that question. Some scientific questions are still scientific, even though maybe we can't find the answer right now because of technology limitations. So think about way back, they used to think the earth was flat. Okay, it is technically a question. You could ask why is it flat, or what is the shape of the earth, but you have to have the technology to test it. Until we could physically leave Earth's surface and be able to see that or observe that, we were limited by our technology. Another similar example could be, is there life beyond Earth? So is there extraterrestrial life? We currently are limited by technology. Just because we haven't found evidence yet doesn't mean that there's not life out there. So keep that in mind for scientific questions. Again, science can answer many questions, but they cannot answer opinions or judgments.